Hello and welcome to World News on the Hour here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. At least 2 people were killed and 7 injured in Russian airstrikes on Kyiv in the early hours of Sunday morning. Ukraine's state emergency services report that a drone attack sparked a fire in an apartment building, forcing dozens of residents to evacuate. Debris from the drones caused fires and property damage throughout the city. A fire broke out in a forest area of the Desnyansky district, and several apartment buildings in various parts of the city were damaged. Emergency services have been dispatched to the attack sites, and the full extent of the attack will be known when their operations conclude. A meeting between the Ukrainian and American delegations in Saudi Arabia will take place today, a day earlier than planned. In a post on social media platform X, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky revealed that he had met with members of his military cabinet to prepare for the talks in Riyadh.
I held a meeting of the military cabinet in Kharkiv. We discussed the situation at the front and the developments in main directions: Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Kharkiv, Sumy, as well as the course of the operation in the Kursk region. We also prepared for the meeting between the Ukrainian and American delegations that will take place tomorrow in Saudi Arabia.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk visited Poland's eastern border on Saturday, calling on Europe to treat the Polish-Belarusian frontier as a shared responsibility. Poland is battling what it describes as a hybrid operation by Belarus, which is using migrants from the Middle East and Africa to destabilize the region.
Poland's border guard is seeing a sharp rise in the number of migrants trying to force their way into Poland.
In 2025, we recorded more than 2,200 attempts to illegally cross the Polish-Belarusian border.
Top Polish officials, including the Prime Minister, Defense and Interior Ministers, visited soldiers and border guards stationed near Belarus on Saturday.
Today, I received a report confirming at least the organizational and political patronage of President Lukashenko's administration. We know of Russian involvement in the operation.
Warsaw says it has reached a 98% effectiveness in stopping illegal migrants from crossing.
There are around 5,000 soldiers at the border, 1,000 soldiers in reserve ready at all times, and 17,000 soldiers deployed for this operation. This is one of the largest operations in Polish history.
To eliminate all crossings, the Polish parliament had passed a bill allowing a temporary suspension of asylum rights. It was approved with the support of the ruling coalition and much of the opposition. The bill awaits signing by President Duda. Under the new law, those who cross from Belarus could be denied the right to apply for international protection. Although there seems to be a consensus when it comes to the need to protect the border, the ruling coalition and the right-wing opposition have clashed over how to approach the issue, while Tusk wants more EU support.
We are mobilizing Europe to treat this border as a shared responsibility.
Last week, MEPs of the Conservative Law and Justice Party voted against a resolution that included labeling the East Shield as a key EU border protection project.
If they give away control over defense to Brussels, or rather Berlin, then EU oligarchs will say it's not possible to build military bases east of the Vistula River. Why? Because they'll say it will provoke Russia.
The East Shield foresees the construction of physical barriers along Poland's eastern border, aimed at slowing down a possible invasion from the east. The EU will help Poland finance the investment. For TVP World, Marek Steele.
Top Hamas political leader Salah al-Bardavil has been killed in an Israeli airstrike on Gaza's city of Khan Yunis. According to local sources, the attack not only killed al-Badawil, but also his wife, both of whom were praying at the time of the attack. The Gaza Strip saw a resumption of Israeli hostilities on Tuesday as Israel, blaming Hamas's refusal to release Israeli captives, launched major strikes on the region. This broke a nearly 2-month-long ceasefire deal brokered by Qatar, Egypt, and the U.S. So far, nearly 50,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since the outbreak of the war in early October 2023. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's decision to dismiss the head of the Domestic Intelligence Service and resume the war in Gaza triggered a protest in Tel Aviv on Saturday night.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's decision to dismiss the head of the Domestic Intelligence Service and resume the war in Gaza triggered a protest in Tel Aviv on Saturday night. Thousands of Israelis took to the streets of Tel Aviv to protest the decision to remove the head of the Shin Bet security agency. Although Israel's Supreme Court temporarily froze the dismissal, opposition figure Yair Lapid has called for a general strike. The protesters in Tel Aviv voiced opposition against the resumption of the war in Gaza this week, which crushed a ceasefire with Hamas. Protesters who gathered in Habima Square waved Israeli flags and called for a deal that would see the release of the remaining Israeli hostages.
Mass protests continue in Turkey following the detention of Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, who was due to announce his 2028 presidential bid. Dozens of other prominent figures were also arrested earlier this week, and the government announced a 4-day ban on political demonstrations. Tens of thousands of demonstrators gathered outside the courthouse where İmamoğlu attended a hearing on Saturday, defying a warning from Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan that authorities would crack down on, quote, street terror. The protesters clashed with the police, leading to dozens of arrests. Protests over İmamoğlu's arrest have spread beyond Istanbul, reaching Izmir, Ankara and several other cities across the country. İmamoğlu was detained on Wednesday, facing charges including graft and aiding a terrorist group. The arrests came a day after a university in Istanbul invalidated his diploma, disqualifying him from the presidential race, as having a university degree is a requirement to run for the nation's highest office under the Turkish constitution. U.S. President Donald Trump is considering lifting sanctions on Turkey and selling the F-35 multi-role aircraft to the country, if Ankara agrees to disable its Russian-made S-400 air defense systems, according to Fox News. After a conversation with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Donald Trump reportedly said he's open to reversing Ankara's exclusion from the F-35 program if Turkey dismantles or relocates the S-400 systems to a US-controlled base. Such a move would mark a shift in US-Turkish relations, strained since Turkey purchased the Russian defense systems in 2019. That deal led to sanctions and Turkey's removal from the F-35 initiative. Washington fears the stealth technology in the F-35 could be compromised and passed to the Kremlin. Serbia is on the edge as anti-government protests intensify against President Aleksandar Vučić. The unrest was sparked by the tragic collapse of the Novi Sad railway station canopy, which killed 16 people and was blamed on government corruption. Now, inflammatory comments from Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Vulin praising Russian intelligence have further fueled tensions.
Alexander Vulin, the Deputy Prime Minister of Serbia, has made no secret of who his friends are. Now he has taken to public praises too.
I am very grateful to the Russian special services, which always support us in our fight against color revolutions, primarily with information.
These inflammatory comments come amidst the ongoing anti-government protests against President Alexander Vučić. The protests first erupted after the Novi Sad tragedy.
Canopy of one of the largest railway stations that is placed in Novi Sad has collapsed, killing at that time 15 people. The renovation of this station was financed by the government with huge amount of money, millions of euros, and it has been seen as a corrupt event.
On Friday, it was confirmed that the death toll climbed to 16, with a 19-year-old man pronounced deceased. A week before the tragic news, Serbia witnessed the biggest demonstration in its modern history.
Hundreds of thousands of people have gathered here from around the country, many people taking a long journey to the capital here to show their disagreement with the government.
I can say for sure that our fight will definitely continue until we see results.
This is despite the attempts to appease the protesters, including the stepping down of Prime Minister Miloš Vučević, who formally accepted his resignation this past Wednesday.
The current structure of the Serbian political system actually creates a situation in which the resignation of the current prime minister is just a fig leaf. Any other prime minister in the current political setting will be another Vučić's aide.
For his part, President Vučić attempted to discredit the protesters by claiming they were seeking a color revolution, parroting the language used by his Kremlin friends to discredit civic society in Russia and abroad.
We, in practical terms, identify two contradictory patterns. On one hand, mechanisms of silent repression that are being applied, and on the other hand, very shallow and inconsistent claims for various concessions to the protesters.
Serbs on the ground are pointing out that Vučić might be running out of options when it comes to keeping the protest movement at bay.
Suppression cannot go too much more, except for us becoming a complete police state with an iron fist. That would be really, really bad for our international community and the region.
Demonstrators now demand a new general election, which could go ahead as early as June. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
A posture and a pose. This is how U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff labelled British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's idea of establishing an international force that would provide security guarantees for a post-war Ukraine. Speaking to pro-Trump journalist Tucker Carlson, Witkoff dismissed Starmer's plan to form the so-called Coalition of the Willing, branding it as simplistic and remarking that not everyone has to be like British wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill. The US official went on to say that it would be absurd to think that the Russians would march through Europe, explaining that, quote, "We have something called NATO that we did not have in World War II." In the same interview, Witkoff said he does not view Russian President Vladimir Putin as the bad guy and called him super smart. A number of landmarks all over the world, including the Sydney Opera House, the Acropolis of Athens and the Eiffel Tower in Paris, went dark for an hour late on Saturday to mark Earth Hour, a worldwide campaign geared towards raising awareness about climate change. First started in Sydney, Australia in 2007, Earth Hour aims to show support for efforts to preserve the environment and call attention to the issue of nature loss. Traditionally, for 1 hour from 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. CET on the last Saturday of March, landmarks and businesses switch off their non-essential lights as a sign of joining the movement. Other notable landmarks which took part in this year's campaign include the London Eye, the Empire State Building in New York, and Warsaw's Palace of Culture and Science. And that brings us to the end of this news bulletin, but we will be back on the hour, so we'll look forward to seeing you then. Goodbye for now.